services for the survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. Every day, they respond to horrifying cases of abuse. They help thousands of women and children access the support they need to address trauma and to rebuild their lives. For example, Lifespan recently assisted a woman after her teenage daughter was sexually assaulted by the woman's husband. Lifespan was able to help the mother and daughter navigate the overwhelming challenges of pursuing justice against the abuser and offer support to the daughter throughout this horrible process. When the mother pursued a divorce from the abuser, Lifespan filed a petition and is representing the mother as she navigates issues of child support and allocation of custody. The 3 Lifespan staffers that the mother and daughter have interacted with all provided critical bilingual and bicultural support. They have provided this crucial service for this family during an incredibly traumatic experience. And all 3 of these staffers are funded by assistance provided through the Victims of Crime Act, or VOCA. Lifespan told me that without VOCA funding, quote, none of these personnel would be able to have done this job. Congress passed Victims of Crime Act in 1984 to establish the Crime Victims Fund. This fund provides grants to state victim compensation and assistance programs which assist victims with expenses like medical bills, funeral expenses, and the loss of wages during recovery. How often I have heard members of Congress come to the floor and in committee speak about the plight of the victims of crime. This is an overt effort by Congress to make sure we are there when they desperately need us. The fund also supplies grants to thousands of victim service providers like Lifespan across America. These providers offer programs serving victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, trafficking, and drunk driving. The Crime Victims Fund doesn't receive a dime of taxpayers' dollars. How about that? It is funded through criminal fines, penalties, forfeited bail bonds, and special assessments collected by the federal government. Historically, most of the money in the fund comes from those criminal fines, but in recent years, deposits into the fund have dropped significantly as the Justice Department began relying more on deferred prosecution and non-prosecution agreements. Monetary penalties from these deferred prosecutions and non-prosecution agreements are currently deposited into the General Treasury instead of this fund. And as a result, this shift has had a devastating impact on the fund and the services available to crime victims in America. That's why a bipartisan, bicameral coalition of members of Congress worked with the advocacy organizations on a fix to the VOCA law to sustain the Crime Victims Fund. Our bill would stabilize the depleted fund by redirecting monetary penalties from deferred prosecutions and non-prosecution agreements to the victims and service providers that desperately need help. The reduced deposits into the fund have already had a devastating impact. Victim assistance grants have been reduced by more than $600 million in 2021, and more cuts are looming if we don't do something. The executive director of Lifespan in Chicago told me that VOCA funds 44% of the agency's services, about $1.6 million annually. A substantial loss in VOCA funds would mean they would have to cut back staff who provide counseling, criminal court advocacy programs, legal services, affecting an estimated 880 clients. Lifespan is not alone. Advocates across the state of Illinois and across the country have reached out and shared what these cuts would mean for their agencies and the victims they serve. The Center for Prevention of Abuse in Peoria, Illinois, noted, I quote, "We never want to be in a position where we have to turn away people who need our services and dedicated care. Our teams are already stretched thin as they live the promise of our mission day in and day out. Fewer VOCA dollars means fewer staff and a lessened ability to help those who need to find safety, food, shelter, empowerment, freedom, and peace." There's no time to waste. Every day that goes by, we miss an opportunity to help replenish this fund. In 2021, the fund has already missed out on approximately $400 million in deposits. We're not even halfway through the year. Imagine how much more money the fund may lose if we don't do something. That's why it's imperative that the Senate immediately pass this bill. The House already did it in March with broad bipartisan support. And here in the Senate, we have a bipartisan coalition of 56 senators, 36 Democrats and 20 Republicans co-sponsoring the legislation. We could send this bill to the president's desk today. We should have sent it to him weeks ago. Unfortunately, there's an objection that has prevented us. In a recent letter to Leader Schumer, victims' rights and law enforcement organizations said the objectors are in effect holding victim services hostage in an ideological quest to overhaul the appropriations process by eliminating budgetary offsets. What a target to choose if you want to change the procedure of the committee. Crime victims? I agree with the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence and so many other groups, more than 1,700, that are begging us to do something and stop holding this critical legislation. The passage of this legislation today would ensure that victims are able to maintain these critical services. Don't we owe it to them after the promise of help to come through? At this point, I'd like to turn to my colleague, Senator Murkowski, and I ask unanimous consent that Senator Murkowski, Toomey, and I be able to complete our remarks prior to the votes.
Without objection.
Senator Murkowski.
Senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, I want to acknowledge and thank my colleague and friend from Illinois for his leadership on this issue. He's outlined well the situation